Okay, good afternoon, welcome back. I will actually ask my colleagues, panelists, to address you with opening remarks, key points, takeaways on the topic. So, Mr. Damir Vanđelić, if you could please start.
Thank you. Hello to everyone. Thank you for spending time with us today discussing quite important matters like this one that we have on the panel, how we see the Croatia 2013 outlook. Firstly, I think that Croatia had a first paradigm 30 years ago to form a new state after 1,300 years of waiting for our sovereign state. Second paradigm that we worked into was for various memberships of United Europe and NATO. And of course now the question is, what is the new paradigm that we should foresee for Croatia? And there are many people, and I'm between them, that we believe that this is a simple economic paradigm. We have to lift up all our GDP per capita, at least on the levels that we have in Slovenia, there, if not even better, until 2030. In that time, we should do a considerable effort to make our government efficient, to allow our entrepreneurs to also grow and develop, and that we have a sustainable industrialization of the country, and that we work on the freedom of entrepreneurship in Croatia. And this is the only thing that can bring us to a good agenda of 2030. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward for the rest of the panel.
My name is Biddle. I am the Executive Director of Prometheus Foundation, which is a fund that provides funding for organizations and individuals who want to advance the ideas of the novelist and philosopher Ayn Rand, who wrote The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged and Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, and several other books. I also run with my wife an educational organization called Objective Standard Institute, where we teach courses and run conferences on philosophy, and Ayn Rand's philosophy in particular, and I'm the editor of the Objective Standard Journal. So unsurprisingly, I'll be speaking today from an objectivist perspective. And what I'd like to add to the discussion is not so much a political point, but more a moral point. Whether you're trying to fight for freedom and free markets in Croatia or in America or in South America, there are typically two arguments that are brought to the fore, and that is the historic case and the economic case. People claim, well, look, where there has been freedom, things have gone well, and where socialism has taken over, there's been rivers of blood and mountains of corpses, and that's sort of the historic approach, and you can point to many concretes to support these ideas. Then there's the economic approach, which is, hey, the way that the economy actually works is that you have to create stuff in order to have stuff, as Elon Musk recently put it. Basically Say's law, right? So supply constitutes demand. If you want to have stuff, you've got to create the goods. The goods then constitute your demand in the marketplace, and if everybody does that, you can trade and you have a win-win situation all around. All of this is really important, but there's another argument that gets ignored, and that is the moral argument for free markets, the moral argument for freedom. And this is something that Ayn Rand was particularly adept at, and I'd like to say just a few words about that. The moral case for free markets you can hear in almost every sentence that is uttered by people in these kinds of meetings, or at least the need for the moral case. And that is because we keep using words like should and shouldn't. The government should do this, and markets should do that, and people should do this. Or it would be good to do X, Y, Z. In other words, there's this idea that freedom is good and that people should be free. Well, if that's true, good and should are moral terms. If it's true that we should be free and that freedom is a good thing. There must be some moral principle by reference to which it is true. What is that moral principle? If you don't know that moral principle, you don't have the moral argument for freedom. Typically, historically, that argument is made in terms of rights. Rights are supposed to be the moral case for freedom. You have a right to your life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and so on. The question, though, is where do rights come from? Are they real or are they made up? Because if they're just made up, if we can't demonstrate that we have them, then we don't really have a moral case. We just have some claims. The three traditional approaches to saying where rights come from and whether they're real are they come from God, and so you have them, or they come from the government, and so you have them, or they come somehow from nature. All of these are problematic. If rights come from God, what do you first have to prove that you have rights? That God exists. This is a really tall order. Nobody's ever done it. And so it's not a stable foundation for rights. Regardless of what your opinion about the existence of God is, if you can't prove that he exists, you can't prove that you have rights. That's not going to help you out. The idea that rights come from government is equally problematic. Because if governments are the source of rights, then they can take rights away. That's to equate laws and rights. Governments make laws, they don't make rights. The whole point of the concept of rights is it's supposed to be more fundamental than government, more fundamental than law. It's supposed to be the thing that governments and laws or legislatures refer to determine which laws and which kinds of governments are legitimate. So rights and laws are just at a different fundamental level. So you can't say that rights come from government, because if that's the case, then just if you're in Nazi Germany, then if you're Jewish, your right is to go into this oven. That's not a good way to think about rights. And if rights come from nature, which sounds like a really good idea, then how is it that they come from nature? Where are they in nature? You cut me open, you're not going to find rights in there. Are they out there somewhere? Where do I go find these things? If we don't know where they come from, then we're toast when it comes to the moral case. And if you can't make the moral case, it doesn't matter what your historic and economic cases are. Rand solves this problem. And I'm going to give you just a 2-minute version of her idea here. And then if you have some questions about it, we can talk about them then. Rights, according to Rand, derive from the nature of human beings. What kind of animal are we? Well, we are what Aristotle called irrational animal. That does not mean that we go by reason all the time. It doesn't, obviously people don't. A lot of people don't go by, I come from California, and our government hasn't gone by reason ever, as far as I can tell. So that's not the thing. But what it means that we're a rational animal is that reason, our rational faculty, is our basic means of living. Because it's our means of understanding what's true and how to put things together to create the values that we need, etc. So everything from food, clothing, and shelter to satellites in the sky, and automobiles, and heart valves, and everything in between comes from people using reason. That's our means of living. What's the one thing that can stop people from acting on their rational judgment? Physical force. If you tie me to a tree or put me in a cage, I can't act on my judgment. I can't act on my basic means of living. If you regulate my business, I can't act fully on my basic means of living. I can only act to the extent that I'm free to act on it. So freedom is a factual requirement of human life given the kind of animal that we are. This is where rights come from as a matter of fact. Rights are simply recognitions, there's an in-here element, of facts out there that we can perceive, that human beings live by reason and they must be free to act on that basic means of living in order to live. Now that's just a really quick snapshot, but let me ask you a question. How much stronger would the liberty movement be in Croatia and everywhere else in the world if everyone who was fighting for liberty stopped claiming that rights come from God, we know not how to prove he exists, or rights come from government, or rights come from nature, but we can't say how. And instead, if we were to say, look, rights are factual requirements of human life, and we can prove it, then we have morality on our side in an objective form, how much stronger would that liberty movement be than the one we currently have?
Hi, John Gašparac, as you heard at the start. I'm with PricewaterhouseCoopers. Just a bit of background. I'm originally from Canada, Vancouver, so just up the coast from Craig here. And when I'm looking at the topic here, 2030 and how Croatia will succeed, will it be a winner or loser? I think that's something that, you know, it depends on a number of things. And a consultant is always the one who says it depends, right? We're the ones who love to say that. I think it's the safest answer. But coming from Canada, I mentioned that because I grew up in an economy in a place where the most important thing I learned was that less government is more. The less there is a government, the more the economy prospers, the more the citizens prosper. One of the keys, and I was actually on a panel yesterday, or I was moderating a panel yesterday talking about digitalna Hrvatska 2030 as well. And I think it's one of the most relevant parts of this discussion from my perspective is that to succeed in that respect and digitize going forward, and I think digitization, listening to the previous panels where we're talking about, you know, the euro and other things that we don't want to happen, I think digitization is something that we do want to happen. It's for the benefit of everyone. It's going to depend on our ability to transform. So transformation is key here. How is transformation going to be possible in a country if you don't have the leadership that's behind it? So this is, you know, there's a lot of challenges ahead of us. One of them is that having the tone from the top. So it sounds like a corporation, but I think that's the way you have to put it. The top of government has to accept the fact that there's going to have to be some austerity. There's going to have to be some cutting down. There's going to have to be some changes. And if the government, the top of the government is behind that, puts that as a priority, then we're going to get somewhere. One thought that, you know, came to mind listening to everybody, and I just wanted to bring it up, was a country like Estonia. Estonia has e-government, and they've been known for this for a long time. But what I wasn't aware of until recently was that how long they've had it. So they've also, similar to Croatia, been a free country for about 30 years, but they started somewhere a little bit different than us. They really had no real place to start with apart from what they could afford, and they went forward, and the leadership was there. And the leadership put being efficient and smart, and I'm not calling anybody stupid when it comes to the government, I'm just saying the political will was there from the start to say we need to do this, get it right from the very start. So they've been filing electronic tax returns with a single click since 2001. They've been voting electronically since 2005. Opening companies at within a few minutes online since 2002. These things are starting to happen here, electronic signatures and this sort of stuff. But what's the point behind this? The point behind this is that the public sector is providing great service to the citizens because that's what they want. And they're evolving, and over these last 20 years, they've evolved incredibly, generating user data and understanding what the people want and what they need. And using that to improve the system, understand the satisfaction around that. What Croatia has an opportunity to do, because one thing that has been mentioned a few times is that we do produce excellent engineers, and they are very successful when they get into industry. Unfortunately, a lot of them leave the country, and they have done so in the past. I had a good discussion point yesterday with somebody talking about InfoBip, which you've all heard of. And the claim that is it or is it not a Croatian company? It was a Croatian company, but it's global, and it's been financed a lot by foreign investors. And we can debate what it is and what it isn't, but the point brought about that was that the less government involvement that there was, the better they were off. And that's what happens a lot in the tech industry, the ICT industry, is that the government doesn't know what they're doing, so they leave them alone, which makes them very happy in most cases. They can develop and grow and become global leaders and employ a lot of people, and this is what we want. And my point around that is the brain drain which occurs. It occurs not because people don't want to live here, because we have Craig, who's just come here, would love to live in Croatia just after being here very briefly. I've been living here 25 years and chose to stay here, and I know a number of others who, when they first come, they want to be in this country. So our youth, they're not stupid, and I'm talking to everybody in the room, is that when they're leaving because they feel they have to leave. They're forced to leave. And we need to create a case where they don't want to leave. Somebody mentioned, GDP per capita, and recently I've come across the information that Croatia has actually gone up on the list. We've improved on that list. Well, of course we have. In the last decade, we've lost 10% of our population. So whatever our GDP was, the numbers work for themselves. I'm an auditor. This makes sense. Have less people, your GDP per capita goes up immediately. We want the number of people to grow and want the GDP to grow. And I mentioned transformation and moving towards e-government and paperless sort of society, and where you don't have to visit the government very often, and it's each document only once, never again, right? Only in one spot. To get to that point, a lot of things would need to happen, and a lot of industries would need to be focused on this, and a lot of jobs would be created, a lot of people would be focused on this, and that in and of itself would create a benefit and a value to the economy. ICT right now is only about 4% of GDP, which just implies that there's a lot of room for improvement there and for us to move forward in this respect. Not to go too far into this topic in this respect, I just want to put that point out there. It's about transformation and about clear leadership towards that transformation, and public and private interaction that is around a general strategy to get there, but a strategy that's going to be there for a long time to come. Thanks.
Okay, thank you all for opening remarks. I guess all three panelists kind of touched on this speed of change. If you're talking about technological change, digital transformation, seems like one point that came across is that maybe in Croatia we are a little bit lagging, that we are not changing as fast as we could. So maybe you can expand on that a little bit. Maybe tell us where do you see opportunities for Croatia, maybe which sectors, which industries. And since you all touched a little bit on government and how government can help that, foster entrepreneurship, make it a little bit easier for all the companies to work, maybe you have specific recommendations for that.
So I think we all are actually aiming at the same point. First, as I mentioned, I think until 2030, the Croatia should focus on increasing simply the economy and a GDP per capita at least to double. In Croatia, there are 1.2 million people that are actually close to the levels of poor existence. There are many peoples that will come into this range, it seems soon, with the inflation and loss of jobs. We have poor demographic trends. But what we need to do to achieve that? So I see two main strategical aspects that we have to focus on. First one is that we have to enable our entrepreneurs to work freely and to simply have less government, as John said. Less government means more prosperity in the entrepreneurship area. But on the side of the government, we need a lean government. Currently, our government is approximately almost 30% of employees in Croatia are actually on the payroll of the government directly. And still, there are approximately 20% of the employees that are actually in the second row, also financed by government. These are public companies. And,
just put the microphone down.
Yeah, it's not working.
It's causing
friction. Okay, working again. There was a misconnection. So we have a lot of people that are working directly for government, and still the government is not efficient enough. So we have to make a government lean. What does that mean? This means that we'll have to work on the processes. The people who know me, my basic education is an engineer, then economics and technology. I worked in many supervisory boards in INA for 7 years, in a fish farming business for 10 years or more, in many other companies. I was also president of the board of investment companies, industrial companies, and also insurance company, Croatia for 4 years. So I have experience as a CEO and a supervisory board member working for shareholders. And from my view, it is clear, government is too slow, it is too big, it is too expensive, And we need to do something on that side. Even the entrepreneurs of Croatia today, they simply cannot wear on their backs all this burden. It is simply too much. So they cannot invest. They're simply very expensive. And all the costs that we have on our backs, I'm also running some private businesses today together with my family. The burden is too large, but also the efficiency of the government is really, how to say, shameful. You want to open the business, it will take you 20 days. It is partially digital, but then you have to wait for certain, Zavod za statistiku, you have to wait 15 days that they give you NKD number of what will you do. Then you have to go to FINA and sign a paper that says that you're a true owner of the business, which is obvious from the first document I signed where I put my money and my name on it. But still, I have to go somewhere and sign the paper. So it takes more than 20 days just to open the business. Once you open the business, you are already in the hands of a lot of bureaucrats and you are waiting for permits. For example, I'm having investments, private investments now, and even in the friendly cities, with the friendly people, no obstruction. You wait for a building permit for 5 months. In 5 months, in the last 2 months, the price of my silverworks increased almost 20% due to aluminium, metal, and a concrete price change. So me as entrepreneur, I live in different circumstances from 2 months from now. Everything's changed. Why? I waited for a building permit for 5 months. So to improve our government, we first have to make it lean. To make it lean, we have to work on processes, because the digitalization of the processes that are current will lead us nowhere, because the processes are wrong. They are defining steps of what to do. And if you follow the steps as they are currently defined, digitalization will do no good. Changing the processes first, then digitalization. When it comes to digitalization, the Microsoft Digital Future Index was just published, and I did some analysis on the numbers. What was fantastic, and it's always the truth in Croatia, we have great people. So, for example, digital skills of general population in Croatia are 28% above the average of European Union. But the digitalization of public service and government is 10% below the average of European Union. So you see the discrepancy there. Great people, poor government efficiency. Why is that? It's simply because the politicians, as Acemoglu and Robinson in their book Why Nations Failed clearly described, are not inclusive. They are simply not listening. So you have experts also today here who are giving free advice and saying, this is my analysis, please follow it, or at least let's discuss it. But the governments are making their own decisions. And you look at the people who are actually participating in government, both in parliament or really are members of the government, they have never worked on private business ever. As I say, they simply didn't build a house for a dog. To build a house for a dog, you have to make a bill of material, you have to go and shop it, and then you have to simply put it together. And of course the dog has to fit into it and be happy. It's not too small, too big. It's not good. And it has to have a roof, which obviously a lot of our decisions, they don't have a roof. So we simply have to have inclusive democracy. We have to allow entrepreneurs to work more freely in an environment that is at least basically honest, based on a moral principle. Because today I'm never, in my 30 years of experience in business, private business, for 1 year I was heading an agency for reconstruction of earthquake. This was an excellent school for me, how the government works from the inside. But in these 30 years, what I saw is that simply, if you go on Croatian courts, you can forget it. You will die before they reach a decision. So there is no elementary morality in that I have to wait 20 or 30 years for a judgment decision. In business, this is a lifetime. 3 years is a lifetime in business. Companies go broke in 3 to 5 years. So my vision of Croatia is efficient government, allowing entrepreneurs to work with the general aim to increase the GDP. By increasing the GDP, we will allow Croatians to be free. Because I believe today that Croatians that are at the bottom of Maslow hierarchy of needs, they are simply fighting for existence. They are not free. And they won't because somebody tells them how to vote. Or they don't go to vote at all because they don't see any change after that. Sorry if I was too long.
Yes. I am going to put this down because I think it's causing more trouble. And it's small enough where you guys can hear us, right? I agree wholeheartedly with this point, especially the need for freedom. If you think about it, what environment is attractive to producers, to people who figure out how to put things together and make them and sell them and make money on it? Like, what do those people need? What do engineers need? What do people in technology need? They need the government to get the hell out of their way so that they can do the thing that they need to do. They need the government to get out of the way so that they can act on their judgment. Their judgment is the thing that makes them productive. Their intelligence, their resourcefulness, their ingenuity. These are all cognitive things that they can't do or they can't act on when the government puts roadblocks up. So if you want to improve the environment for businessmen and for entrepreneurs and the like, the thing you have to do is get rid of government regulation. You have to just get rid of every kind of law and regulation that stops people from acting on their judgment. The reason there's a brain drain in a place like Croatia is because there are freer places for these people to go and to do the things that they want to do. They can go produce their widgets or their technology somewhere else and do it with less trouble and make more money and have higher margins and have a better workforce. So the solution is relatively simple in terms of what has to happen at the political level, because it's very straightforward. Deregulate. Get the government out of the way and let businessmen and entrepreneurs produce. The difficult thing is to answer the question, well, why is it that the government keeps trying to regulate the hell out of them? Why is it that the government keeps trying to manipulate the currency? Why is it that the government keeps spending money and increasing taxation as a necessity after spending money, and all of those problems that we talk about at the political level? The reason the government keeps doing all of that is because almost everybody agrees that the government's job is to take care of people, right? That we're all in this together and the collective has to be taken care of. So we've got to take the money from the businessmen and redistribute it to the people who didn't produce that wealth, et cetera, et cetera. This is the problem. And politics is downstream from culture and philosophy. If you want to change things at the political level, we have to change our attitudes about whether or not we have some moral obligation to take care of everybody. We don't. Which is why nobody's pointed to any facts of reality that give rise to that moral obligation. The only obligation we have is to ourselves and to each other insofar as we say to each other, look, we're not going to use force against each other. We're going to leave everyone free to act on his judgment, to engage voluntarily, to produce and trade, and we have a win-win-win-win-win culture then that creates enormous amounts of wealth and makes it all the more attractive for businessmen and entrepreneurs and engineers to come into that culture. So you have to fight this at the fundamental moral level. We've got to have a sea change in our morality. We have to recognize that being moral doesn't consist in self-sacrificially serving other people. It consists in being productive, being thoughtful, producing values, trading them with others, and all of this, by the way, is selfish. Which means we have to lose this stigma against the idea that self-interest is good. We've got to lose this nonsense that, oh, self-interest is bad. We've got to tamp down on anybody who's acting in a self-interested manner. Nonsense. Self-interest is exactly what makes this world move, and it's the thing that has to be legalized. We have to legalize self-interest, which means get the government out of the way of people who use their minds to produce values and create wealth. So again, I'll be a broken record on this. This is a moral battle or it's no battle at all. We either have the moral case for freedom or we lose freedom. So.
Thanks. Lots been said, last two answers. I would like to add a couple things to this. I mean, I agree, Damir, you touched on a point that I fully agree with, that we produce some really good people. The government, even when we look at this thing called DESI Index, Digital Economy and Society Index, in terms of the EU, Croatia is ranked overall 19th or 20th, but when it comes to digital public services, we're 24th. And we're lagging behind for many reasons, some being legal, some being just no push forward in this area. What I would add to this is that, and we have some examples, you know, we have Slovenia, who's next door, who's 13th on that index, and they're doing some really, you know, quick wins, low-hanging fruit. They're putting out vouchers, especially to the youth, you know, 250 euros to buy IT equipment so they can get more proficient in this. The point here is that to create the platforms and become e-government, you also have the users proficient in this, right? So I'm not talking about our great engineers that we have a lot of. I'm talking about the rest of the population, the seniors, and everybody else who also needs to be using these platforms in the future. So they also have to be educated. So this is a reskilling, a retooling part of it. The other part, of course, is we talk about reducing the size of government. What do you do with those people? You don't want to create a social issue, so there's also a retooling and a reskilling process that could happen there. Okay. Now, this is something we do at PwC as well. We have a transformation agenda, transformation strategy, and part of that strategy is to promote innovation. And innovation comes from the freedom to be able to create your company and do with it what you wish. And this is something Craig's brought up, this idea of freedom. Well, the people who are the developers, the guys with the ideas, they have to have the freedom to think that if I do it here, I'm going to retain my rights, I'm going to retain what I'm producing and go forward with that. I say that in the context of that, I brought up Infobit, but there was a lot of startups in the past that have been in hubs, either in Osijek, in Zagreb, Split, Dubrovnik, Rijeka. And I was in a conference in London a few years ago, a startup conference about Southeast Europe, and they knew, the guys, the investors there knew exactly what was going on because they were ready to jump in and steal the talent and bring it to the UK and set them up there. So that was their strategy, and it worked well because the stuff I saw in London, which is now UK-based, we'll never see here again, and it's a shame. And this is where we need to have our focus. So the government should be stimulating investors to go into the startup communities and support them. Tax reforms and the like. Again, in Slovenia, what I understand, they are fully behind this. They're fully behind creating many more engineers in the future. They're going to be willing and happy to be here, that will be supported from day one, and in reskilling and retooling the population. And this is what really is part of the bigger solution to all of this.
So thank you all. Very good points, very great insights. Since the time is actually flying, I'm going to open up now discussion to the room. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask our panelists.
Can I make one comment?
Sure.
One of the, to confirm what Craig was saying, one of the great statements of the 20th century that changed the world was uttered by Deng Xiaoping, who was the then paramount leader of China. And he said, to be rich is glorious. Now what he meant by that was a market-based idea. To enrich yourself is glorious because in order to do so, you have to make other people better off. This changed the world. It brought China into the 19th century, never mind the 20th century. It brought China into a place where they saw, and the Chinese people saw, that this self-interest is what will bring us into the future, and what did bring them into the future.
Thank you.
Hello.
Please.
I'd just like to take up one point. Self-interest, as for example, talked about by Adam Smith and so on, is not the same thing as selfishness. Selfishness is a quite identifiable and unpleasant characteristic. I'm being rather selfish myself, but you know it when you come across it, and it has nothing whatsoever really to do with rational self-interest. It is important, I think, and I don't wish to be a preacher, as Mrs. Thatcher hated preachers, so she said, shut up, Rob, get on. But it is important, I think it is important to make this distinction, because we shouldn't think that if we are creating a framework in which self-interest is rewarded, we are also promoting selfishness. Because as she said, the people who are advancing their self-interest are looking after their families. They're looking after lots of people. And in America, certainly in the past, this was the most individualistic society, which she was pointed out, it was one of the most generous societies in the world. So I think it is important to keep this distinction. I mean, we could we might not come from the same exactly philosophical background, you and I, Catholic, not. But I do think that distinction between selfishness and self-interest is worth hanging on to, particularly, dare I say, actually, in a Christian country like Croatia, where actually, if people say, oh well, everybody wants to have deregulation or something, it's selfish. That's not true. Yeah. And I would also say that some of the most selfish people I've ever met in my life are socialists.
Yeah. So the distinction you're making, I think, is very important, and I agree with you. Now, we could have a debate about whether or not selfishness ought to be treated as a bad, whether that should capture people who rob and stab and do whatever they want to get whatever they want, which is sort of the typical version that people think of it. But set that aside. Let's just talk, instead of using a term for it, let's just talk about what the actions are we're talking about. Is it right or wrong for people to use their minds, produce values, keep the things that they produce, use them, trade them to their own advantage and other people's advantage, win-win situations? Is all of that good or bad, morally speaking? I think we're on the same page that it's good, morally speaking. And what I want to do, and I think we have to do at the cultural level, if we want to make really good political change, is we have to get everyone who is willing to think to see that this is good, and that it's not true that being good means self-sacrificially serving others. In other words, giving up your values at a net loss to you, which is what selflessness or self-sacrifice is all about. To equate self-sacrifice with morality is a real problem, because it means that when people are producing and trading and profiting, they're not being moral. And we've got to get rid of that false idea. So I think you and I are completely on the same page about the distinctions that need to be made. So set aside the terminology and let's focus on this business of trying to understand why it is. Here's the simplest way to put this. Does human life require the production and use and trade of values, or does human life require people to give up their values and not have them? It's obvious when you put it that way. I mean, there's no way to think about it in any other way. But people lose sight of this because they treat morality as this thing about giving up your values rather than pursuing them. And we need to treat morality exactly as the opposite thing. Morality is about pursuing values, creating wealth, using your mind, and then engaging with others to trade so that we can all flourish.
If I could just make a point, also philosophical but very relevant to Croatia. And I think it transcends, just economic interests or discussing human behavior at that level. So Croatia gained its independence through a very bloody war of independence in 1991, and without self-sacrifice of thousands of people who were willing to die and were not thinking about themselves, we would not be here today talking about how to make the economy more efficient and competitive. So in certain periods of history, heroic sacrifice is actually needed. It's needed just to survive. That was our case. We could have just been trampled by the Serb army in 1991, which had most of the analysts at the time weren't giving Croatia much of a chance. And I would say, regarding our responsibilities towards each other, our center believes that we do have obligations to each other, and that it's a bad idea to outsource that responsibility to the government. So You know, our social responsibility as citizens is there, it's real. I can't expect a happy life for myself and my family if I disregard the needs of everyone around me. That's just a basic point. And it's not a good idea to depend on the Ministry of you know, Social Affairs to take care of everyone. That's a terrible idea. This idea of welfare and the government, you know, this collectivist approach, I think we all agree is a bad one. But we have to, at a certain level, grant that individuals have not just to themselves and to their families, but to the wider common good a responsibility. So St. Thomas Aquinas makes the point, and it's an important distinction when we're talking about private property. He makes a distinction between the right to private property, which is clear and recognized, but also there's use. So it's not, it's important to recognize that there's a moral responsibility to using our property in a way that serves the common good, not just ourselves. I think that's the Christian tradition, and that's one that I think is important to mention in a discussion like this.
And I don't think it's in conflict with what Greg is saying. If you just read the literature of Ayn Rand, you would then probably come to the same
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
There's some conflict and there's some agreement, and the agreement, in my view, is the most important part of it. So, but the disagreement is not trivial. So I'll say just a quick word about defending your country and dying when you do, and then I want to say a word about the disabled and the people who can't take care of themselves. Patrick Henry, one of the American founders, said, "Give me liberty or give me death," and he was speaking for the entire founding culture. That was not a selfless statement. It was a very self-interested statement. These men recognized that a life without liberty is not worth living. And I think probably the soldiers who died fighting for Croatia's independence had much, if not all of them, certainly a lot of them, had much the same attitude. Hey, we're fighting for something because human life requires freedom. Proper human life requires that we are independent. And we want that. We're going to fight for it. We're going to fight for it for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our community, for the things we care about. So I think you can have all of that in mind and still have it be a self-interested pursuit. So I just wouldn't call it a sacrifice, because the sacrifice is giving up something more important for the sake of something less important. I think these soldiers probably thought that freedom was more important than living a life without it. So just on that note.
Sorry, on that note, if I can add.
Sure.
So I was a member of Homeland Board, mobilized in 1990, 1995, and 1992. I was a war prisoner for 6 months. I completely agree with you. I was in this war for my self-interest. I wanted freedom. I wanted Croatia to be a country where my children will grow. I completely agree on that view. I think the sacrifice part is present, but it was not my general motive. And I didn't want to be sacrificed, by the way. So I was trying to avoid it as much as possible. So I agree with you. At that time, when I reflect on that time, it was a self-interest.
Yeah, good. I'm glad to hear that right from the horse's mouth, in effect, because I think it's an important. And I don't think, in substance, we're in disagreement here. It's just that it's the use of the concept sacrifice, and whether it means any kind of an exchange, or whether it literally means an exchange of something of more importance for something less important, and that's a different kind of thing. In regard to we're also in agreement that the government should not be taking care of the poor and the disabled, that should be left to the private sector. I would like to just add a couple things there real quick, though. What poor people need, if they don't want to be poor, is they need to work and produce value so that they have more wealth, right? And there are all sorts of different levels of wealth. You know, I have a lot of friends who make a whole lot more money than I do, because I chose a career that doesn't make a lot of money. So having less wealth isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just, you know, what do you choose to do? What all of these people need is freedom so that they can produce and trade, right? And if they can, then whatever their wealth level is what they chose to make of themselves. Now, of course, there are the people who cannot take care of themselves at all, the literal disabled. But what the literal disabled need is for the able people to be able to produce enormous amounts of wealth so that they can rain charity down on these people in ways that they wouldn't even know what to do with it. And this is precisely what happens in a wealthy culture, right? Giving to charity, my wife and I give to St. Jude's Children's Hospital regularly because we hate leukemia and we hate the idea that children die, which is a wretched disease, right? So we give to that. Now, do we do that selflessly or do we do it self-interestedly? We do it self-interestedly. And we are so adamant about trying to cure that disease that if we had money and sufficient money to give to that charity and didn't give to that charity, it would be a breach of our integrity. It would literally be a breach of our integrity, is the way I look at this. Charity is not a fundamental value because it's not a factual requirement of human life. It's not true that we have to give away our values to other people in order to live. But charity is an issue of integrity. If you really care about an important school, or curing a disease, or taking care of certain elderly people or whatever, if you really care about that and you have the money to support them, charity is a self-interested thing to do. So even there, I'm not sure how much disagreement we would have. I agree all of this should be left to the private sector. I think
as
that,
much as possible.
yeah, and I think that it can be very self-interested to give to charity, and it's just a matter of integrity. So I don't see a problem there. In America, Americans give $400 billion a year to charity.
There's lots of incentives to do so.
I think that Friedman actually explained this in his own words, and he introduced terms objectively responsible people and people who cannot be held objectively responsible for their actions. And the nature actually took care of the fact that most of us, for the most of the time, can be held objectively responsible. Yeah. And there are a lot of people in this country and other countries who are actually directly responsible and accountable for the situation they ended up in. The problem is that you have power in political hands who can proclaim these situations as injustices being inflicted on those who are actually more prone to work, more prone to entrepreneurism, more prone to whatever. And they actually find these, identify these as causes of their problems instead of actually probably solutions that can actually help these people. Well, Croatia being Christian and Catholic in particular, I think that and we quite often have these types of discussions, Deb and myself, and myself within my Catholic environment. I'm trying to explain the difference between socialism and solidarity. You were referring to, in my view, to a certain extent, to solidarity. You have been maybe using different words, and we do support a lot of things, but we always try to tell these people this does not come by itself. We have to create this wealth, and we are trying to a certain extent, share with you and support you because we think that we cannot hold you objectively responsible. Even for those that we can hold objectively responsible, at least to the way we're being taught by Catholic religion, that would be called a Christian love. So there are people who actually go beyond this, but again, one of the virtues that we're also being taught is that we have to be prudent. So if we continue doing this and ruin ourselves, that's really not what we're being taught by Catholic religion. So it's I think that the first step is, at least on the local level, making a distinction between solidarity and socialism because it's mixed up.
Thank you. I think we have a comment or a question from a second row.
Just one question for Mr. Vanđelić, please. I agree with you when you all said that our opinion is that the Croatian government is too big, too inefficient, too slow, and I believe that the smaller the government is, with the smallest possible taxes that will provide basic services, the nation in general is stronger, and also it's inverse proportional. So, as the topic of this lecture is Croatia 2030 winner or loser, I believe that we're going to be, the prerequisite to be winner is that we, by 2030, we create smaller, efficient, and fast government. How do you see that is possible if we know that majority of the cash flow in Croatia is controlled by the government in this way or another way, and also the EU funding and free money from EU that is coming in Croatia is actually pouring the concrete on such a status quo. So basically, the majority of the voters do not want the system to change. They are actually who are keeping the system running. So, or to put it simple, in another words, if you go on an election and say you're going to reduce government sector for 20%, you won't enter the parliament.
Well, thank you for your question. You're right. I have 3 kids, and when the kids are small, you take them to a first shop. They see a toy, and they want that toy. They knew all their life they want that toy. And when they see a next shop, they change their mind. I think it's the same with the voters. Our voters have never seen anything else but this. If the things are changing, and if you explain them, these are the gains and these are the losses of our scenarios that we are proposing you, they might change their minds. And I think you can always start with the things that you can deliver quicker and that will convince the voters to change their minds. But being in a business for 30 years, I believe in benchmarks. You compare yourself. If you are running on 100 meters, you should look on Usain Bolt and what he's doing, how he's training, and what times he has. So our government should look on the European ratios of administration. So our administration, compared to all the parameters, are twice as big as we can take. Simple as that. So the cost of our government and everything linked with that is simply twice as big. We have to make it lean. The European funds that you're mentioning, I'm using some of them, they're very complicated. It takes 2.5 to 5 years to get the money. Why? Because we don't have lean government. That's the reason why. And we don't have the processes that lead to a very simple steps that you have to do to take the money from European funds. And then you don't have a sufficient digitalization of these processes that you are effective. Yeah? Because many of the things that we are doing now today manually, simply by walking from one administrative guy to another, can be done digitally. Yeah. So I think you have a good point. When you say to people, we have to cut the government employees to half, this is 200,000 people, roughly. Of course they will be upset. What will we do? But you have to, in a parallel, work on the entrepreneurship projects that are plenty, that are simply waiting. When you look at only on the real estate that the government has, hotels, resorts and everything, it's all stopped. You cannot move it. There are urbanistic reasons, there are administrative reasons, the land register is not, how do they call it, legalized. Yeah? So we don't have trust in the land books in Croatia. This is something that the government should already do. What I want as an entrepreneur, to have a trust in the registers that the governments provide. One of them is land register. So I go to a land register or I go to a state attorney and the state attorney says, I'm sorry, Mr. Vanđelić, we don't have trust to land registers. But they are government owned. I pay you for that. I want you to deliver me a service. Yeah, that's what I want. So we have to have a leaner, more efficient government. End of the game. Of course, you have to ask yourself why we don't have no big industry. Why all the German or American or whatever investors or Toyota from Japan doesn't want to come to Croatia? Because we have a high level of corruption. It is on such a high level that, for example, some Swedish company told me, if you are on Transparency International below 50, we don't want to work in that country. So only one parameter, that we don't want to come. We are corrupted. We don't want to, spoil ourselves. We have, I don't know how many, I think 200,000 employees in the world. And if we go to Croatia and do something bad, it will spoil us, our business globally. Yeah? We have good engineers. We have good people. We are a great country. Why the people are not coming? Because the context that the government should provide is bad. So corruption, inefficiency, etc. And very expensive.
What's that?
Yeah, expensive, yeah.
Okay, Thank you. Thank you all for very good insights, very good comments. Thank you all for your questions and participation. Okay, maybe one quick question. Yes.
Thanks. My name's Alex McQuitch. Thank you for your time. Along the same lines, I'm really interested in hearing practical solutions to, I guess, the problem of big government and corruption, and leaving the problem of human capital leaving the country. With your business experience, if you could change one thing or implement one practical solution to move towards Croatia being winner by 2030, what would that be?
So video streams.
It's mindset. If I could change one thing, okay, and that's one thing I'm serious about. Is I'm involved in that daily in terms of the people I work with. It doesn't happen overnight. Okay, so a mindset change, meaning that we can do this. A mindset change being that I will do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. So that's really the nitty-gritty of it. I've been here 25 years. When I came here, we started Pricewaterhouse and became PricewaterhouseCoopers. There's 2 of us. Now there's 250 of us. But the mindset and the culture there, should I call it Western? It's just very positive, it's very nurturing, and it's moving forward, right? And that's done by example, that's done by clear leadership, courage, no fear of transparency, no fear of sharing information, no fear of doing the right thing, and no corruption whatsoever. And believe me, there's been opportunities for that. So this is what I'm talking about.
One thing at the political level, protect property rights.
So it's very difficult to point on one aspect because they are all linked. But as I have in my 30 years of experience, I have this 1 year working for the government, trying to establish a kind of subversive ideas of very transparent, like, you know, the agency Vukovic investigated all what we do, and he claimed that we are the most transparent public institution in Croatia. We have introduced several levels of anti-corruptive measures, introducing ISO standard, and transparency is one of the measures against corruption. We introduced digitalization, because if you have a contact with a robot, you cannot corrupt him. Yeah? You know, you ask, okay, what I need there, and he answers you. Well, and you can do software robots very easily. It's really something that you can easily do. So, transparency, fight against corruption, and choosing the best people for the job. But this choice has to really come from a competition. At one moment during when Jadranka Kosor was Prime Minister, First Lady Prime Minister, she introduced really for public companies and supervisory boards, she introduced really a competition. And I looked into that, and it was really a kind of competition. It was not perfect, but it was really a competition of good people. At that time, a lot of people entered into the management boards or the supervisory board. So I expect my government to choose the best people to run ministries, public companies, etc., and to guide themselves with certain moral principles and efficiency. Today, you never heard that, for example, a president of the board of HEP, which is a huge electrical distribution company and production company in Croatia, has a certain program that he says, in 4-year period, I will build 300 megawatts of renewable energies. Have you ever heard that? How they are chosen? Because they are friends, because they are known, because they are members or whatever. Such a large company should not have a person on the top chosen by these wrong parameters. It has to be a person which is effective, which delivers. I don't care which religion or party he is. If he delivers, I'm happy. As a citizen, as a taxpayer. So these 3 things: transparency, anti-corruption, and choosing the best people for the job, whatever the level is.
So unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you.